Hello everybody and welcome back to this week's Sencha Cafe. My name's Stephen Ball. I'm going to be just moderating here to help you through today. Online with us is Stuart Ashworth, who's Sencha MVP. Good morning, Stuart.
Morning, everyone.
So before I hand over to Stuart to take you through the part 2, as he's building this X-Mail kind of mail equivalent of kind of Google Mail a bit using some of the Sencha components. Let's just quickly help Stuart tailor the session today with a couple of quick poll questions. So if you can just please be ready to answer these. So firstly, what best describes your use of Sencha? Are you not using it yet? Are you actively trialing it? Are you using it in development, or are you using it in development and production? So using it in development and production is taking the early lead. I feel like I'm accommodating on a horse race. Close behind now is using it in development and actively trialing it. Okay, we've got about 40% of the vote so far. And yeah. Okay, we're going to ask another follow-on question in a moment just to check which versions of Sencha you're using as well, so we can highlight anything specifically to help you get moved up as we go through as well. So we'll just draw that onto a close there. But a good, oh, that's my control panel. A good mix of across the board there in terms of people using in development and actively trialing it. So let's have a quick look now at the version. Which version of Sencha XJS are you using? And a split here, a few people using Sencha 5 or lower. If you've got multiple versions, just choose the current one that is relevant to you. But yeah, about 20% of people are still on Sencha 6, 10% on 5 or lower, and most of you are up on Sencha 7 from the looks of things. Well, Sencha 6 is up to 25%, so good chance to have a look and hear some of the extra bits that are coming around. If you missed yesterday, Mark Smano did an excellent webinar looking at some of the new stuff in Sencha 7, which is available on the BrightTalk platform. So please feel free to drop over there and have a look at that. Okay, yeah, so I say Sencha 7 quite in the lead, but every using Sencha is online today, which is pretty good. That helps us kind of get through a bit quicker. Right, Stuart, I'll hand over to you for the main core content. As I say, as always, please use the GoToWebinar control panel. This is a fully live session. It's not pre-recorded, so Stuart will be able to see your questions as they pop up. If there's anything relevant, then please make sure they just pop through into the chat. We can try and make this as interactive as possible, which is what we're trying to do with the Sencha Cafe session. And also, we've got a part 3 of this next week. But if there's other topics or specific areas of things that you'd like some additional knowledge and support around, then please put some comments into the chat, or there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. And we'd love to hear kind of what you guys want to help you further for the future as well. Okay, Stuart, over to you.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and welcome everyone this morning. It's good to have that quick poll because it means we can I can tailor how we talk about things. Everyone's using the framework in some regards. Some people are just trialing it, so this is a good chance to see some of the more advanced features that you've maybe not come across yet, and some people using it in production, which is good. So hopefully you can get a few nuggets of new knowledge this morning. So as Stephen said, this is part 2 of our little series building a sort of Gmail clone with XJS Classic toolkit. So I've got some links on the screen at the moment if you want to check out the application that we're going to build over the course of the 3 sessions, and the middle link there is what we're going to try to get to by the end of today's session. And if you want to have a wee look at the code, I've got it up on the GitHub repo now, so you can have a look at that and clone it and play around with stuff on your own environment. Those should be in the chat on the webinar as well. So if you, when I've left this screen, you can get them there. So we'll just have a quick look at what we built, what we're going to build, just to summarise that, because I think some people maybe didn't attend last week, so are jumping into this, fresh. So this is our application that the finished application. So it's look quite familiar to you as basically a clone of Gmail. So we've got a tree down here with the labels and folders that you can organise your mail into. We've got a list of emails in the middle. We can star and unstar things. We can click through to view the message itself, and we've got some action buttons here. We can archive it, we can delete them, or we can mark them as read, and we can write messages. We can search for people's email addresses and send messages there, and now we can see them in the different folders. So that's what we're aiming for. Last week we got the message grids sorted. This is what we got up to last week. So we've got the message grid sorted, and we've got the click-throughs to the message details. So now this week we're going to try to get to this stage where we have the tree on the side, which is filtering the messages list, and we're going to add some more actions to the message toolbar, so we can archive and delete and mark messages as unread. So that's what we're aiming to get to. So we're going to get stuck in, because we want to leave some time for questions at the end if possible, because hopefully, or you might have some questions or some comments. So if you have them during the session, just stick them in the comments box over on the webinar software, and I'll try and dip in if I spot them as we go. So we left off last week. We didn't quite get to doing the star functionality on the column, so we're going to start with that. So we're going to go to our application folder. So here we have our application folder. We've got our app folder, which has the common code for the two toolkits, because it's a universal application at the moment, although we're just using Classic just now. And inside the messages view folder, we have a message grid. So we've got 3 columns at the moment. We've got full name, subject, and a date, which you can see here. So we're going to add a new column, and we're going to use the action column type, which is a sort of special column where you can specify items within the action column, and they will give us an icon on the screen which will receive a click event, and we can do something when that click happens. So often they get used for like a wee delete icon or a edit, pencil icon, that sort of thing. So we're going to use them today for the star functionality. So we're going to put it at the front of the columns array. So I'm just going to paste that in. So we use the X-type action column, and we give it a small width, and we'll close that off. And then it receives an items config, which is just like your normal container items array. And it has, it'll take a config for each item that you want to show in the action column. So you can have as many items as you like, and they will all show beside each other, one after the other. And so we're going to, because we don't have a star, so we're going to use the glyph config, which I'm going to paste in because it's got this special hollow star, and that's going to show up in our grid. So if we just refresh the page now, we should see the star appear there. And hopefully it's not going to, well, it will do something. It's going to receive the row click event as normal, so that bubbles up to the row click itself. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. We just want to toggle the star functionality on and off. So let's add the second one. So we want to be able to show the other icon when it is starred. So we're going to add a second glyph, and at the moment these will show, if we refresh now, they'll show one, they'll show beside each other. Well, they should do. If we refresh, they're not just now. Well, we'll sort that. We'll get to that as we go. I think they're too wide. In fact, that's why, because the column's 25 pixels, so it's getting cut off because of the width of the column. So there they are. Because we want to show one at a time, we're just having it narrow, so it shows one at a time. So we're going to quickly add a tooltip to the button. So we want it to say star when you hover over it, because obviously there's not a huge amount of feedback as to what the button does. So we're going to add tooltip to each of them. The one with the hollow star gets a star, and the other one gets star. And then we're going to, now we have to do a wee bit of trickery here to get one to hide and one to show, because obviously it's only in one state or the other, so we don't have both of them. So we can override this special class function called getClass. And what that does is you can return a CSS class that will get applied to this this icon button component. And so what we do here is we check to see if the record. So we get three parameters. We get the v, which is the item itself. Meta is just some metadata about the action, and then we get the rec, which is the record for that row. So we check to see if the record is starred already, and if it is starred, then we return the x hidden display CSS class, which basically just applies a display none to the component, and that will hide it. So for all the ones that are starred, we will hide this one, and to get the other one to show up, we want to do the inverse of that. So if we paste that in, we override the get class in the unstar, and we say not starred. We then apply the x hidden CSS class, which will hide it. So now if we refresh, we should just see one, and none of these are starred at the moment, so we won't, we need to add the functionality to toggle them before we'll see it all in action. So to do that, we need to add a handler to this, to each of these buttons. So we use the handler config. Let me just, we do handler and we give it a function, and that takes a few parameters. So we've got the view, we've got the row index for the click. We've got the column index. Oh, I missed a comma. Get rid of these spaces. Column index. We've got the item of the click, and then we've got the event, and then at the end we've got the record. So what we want to do is we want to raise an event when this click is made on the grid itself, so that we can handle it further up the tree in the view controller. So we'll take the view parameter, which is the view within the table, within the grid. Sorry. So that's the table class. So we want to access the view parameters, and we can access the grid that it's part of. So we can do that, and then we can fire an event using the fire event method, and we will raise an event called star message, and we'll pass the record up with that event. We'll copy that and we'll paste it underneath in the unstar. Get rid of these extra spaces, and we'll call that event unstar. Yeah, unstar. So now we've got two events coming out of this grid, which we can handle higher up. So to do that, we need to go to where our message grid is instantiated, so it's in the main class. Down here we've got a message grid, and we're already listening to the item click event, so we want to add our own listeners to this listeners config. So we want to listen to the star message event, and we'll use a handler called onStarMessage, which is a string, and that relates to a string, a method name in the view controller. And we want to do the same for the unstar. So we go on unstar, I think it's capitalized, unstarMessage. So now those are hooked up, that will look for two methods in the view controller itself, which we'll add just now. So we're going to do those in the base class. So we've got this main controller base, which is the base class of this main controller in the classic toolkit. So we're going to add all this sort of functionality to this, because this is a sort of generic functionality that will probably apply to the modern toolkit app as well. So if we go in there, and we will, I'm just going to find the code in my other side. So we'll go onStarMessage is what we want first. We go to the function, and we passed in the record with that event. So we're going to put a parameter there, the message record. So to start it, we want to we want it to appear in this. So if we go back to the final, we want it to appear in this starred label. So we need to add a label of starred to the message. So we'll access the message record, and we'll use the add label method that we added to the message model in last week's session. And that essentially it takes a number. So all these folders have an ID, and the message maintains an array of IDs for the folders it falls into. So essentially this is an ID, but we've got an enum set up, or we should do. So we'll add that now. So what we'll do is we'll create a folder in the common class called enums. I'll just paste this in so you can. We're going to call it label, and what this is going to be used for is sorry, new file labels. It's just going to be a record of all the IDs for each of the folders, just so we don't have to keep putting magic numbers all through the code. So we're going to create that class, and then we'll need to require it into the controller so that we can make use of it. So we're just going to add the requires array here. So requires in the enum, and that let's look at that class again. So it's a singleton, so that will just get instantiated as soon as it gets required in, and it's got these properties with the ID. So that means we can access xmail.enums.labels.inbox, and that will just give us a 1. But it means that we've not got magic numbers scattered around the place where we're referencing 1 or 2 or 3, and we don't know what those are. So just a nice way to pass around IDs without getting things confused. So that's where we put that there. So we add the label of star, so that means that it'll fall under that component, under that folder when we come to doing the filtering later on. And we also need to set the starred property that we referenced in our action column. So we'll set that to true, and then we will commit the changes just so they don't show up as modified. In this scenario, we've not got a backend that's persisting the data, so we're just keeping it locally. So we'll just do a commit on that. And now we're going to duplicate that for the unstar. So it's basically exactly the same, just inverse. So we're going to use the remove label, and we didn't put so remove label star and remove the label starred. We're going to set the starred property to false and commit that. So now if we load back our application, we should hopefully, so we've got one more thing to do. So now we see the star property has been set, but by clicking it, we got taken through to the details. So we want to stop that. So there's one thing we need to do to stop that. So basically this on message click handler that we added to the main class here, it tells us to go and look at the message, show us the details of that. But we don't want to do that when the action column's clicked. We only want to do that when the rest of the columns click. So what we can do is we can the action column has a class called x-action-call-icon, which if we look in the source we can see down here. So there it's there, x action call icon. So we want to basically say if the click has been made on that on an element with that class, we want to ignore the message click event. We want to just bail out and don't do the select message. So we can use the event object, which is E, and we can use a special method called get target, and that will say, is there an element in the chain of the click? Does it have this? Is there somewhere in the chain? Does it have this class? And if it does, then we just want to bail out. We'll just do return, and that will stop those clicks going through to the main click message. So now we just get a star, and it'll refresh the grid and re-render. So that's flicking the action column. It's using that that get class again. So it's re-evaluating that function, and it's getting that hidden class and swapping them over. And now we can click the rest of the column, and that click works still. So that's the action column sorted. Now we can star and unstar messages. So now we're going to do the extra actions that we had on the grid. So now we can click through. All we've got here is a back button. So we want to add some extra actions for archiving, deleting, and marking messages as unread. So we define those in the messages toolbar down here. So at the moment we've got refresh and back. So what we want to do is add the extra one. So we'll start with maybe the delete button. Oh no, archives first. So we'll start with the archive button. And what we're going to do is I'll just copy and paste this in here. So we'll give it a tool tip of archive, and we'll use the icon class, which is the font awesome library that's included as default. And we're going to give it a handler, and we're going to name that handler on archive click. And note we use a string here, and we'll come to that in a minute. And because we don't want the button to flicker on before it evaluates the view model's binding, so we're going to set hidden true to start with. And then we're going to bind its hidden property so that we can toggle this button on when we go to the message details and turn it off when we go back to the main list. So we're going to do a slightly different style here. In the current setup, these two buttons just get toggled by the presence of the selected message, which means selected message is truthy, then we're on the reader view, so we can toggle the refresh button off. So this is a bit more, we want to be able to do this slightly differently for reasons that will come appear probably next week. So in fact, maybe we'll just simplify it this week. So we can just do it in the same way as the back button, because we want the archive to show when we're on the selected message. So we'll just duplicate that, and that'll be fine. So that's the archive button set up. So we'll do the same with the back. The back button, I'll just copy and paste most of it so that we can speed up. So we've got delete, we've got icon class, and we'll add the handler again on delete click. We'll make it hidden to start with, and we'll take this binding and make it exactly the same. We'll close off the config. And lastly, we're going to have the mark as unread, sorry. So that has a little envelope icon. Let's turn off these. And we'll add a handler called on mark as unread. And once again, we'll do the hidden, scrolling. We'll do the hidden piece here, paste that in, and close off the thing. So now we need to make a method to match each of these handlers. So we've got on archive click, on delete click, and on mark as unread click. And we're just going to do these. We're just going to raise an event for each of them. So this fire event, we'll just raise an event called archive. So this is a technique I like to use rather than, so we could just, different ways you could sort of handle the events on these clicks. You could have these event handlers, these could relate to names in the main controller, view controller, so they could just bubble all the way up and get picked up. But that becomes quite tied to the parent. So I like to try and make these sort of components a bit more standalone and have them raise events that are relevant to the action being called. So that's why I quite like to do it this way in this scenario. So we're on delete click and we're going on mark as unread click, and we'll just raise mark as unread. Okay, so these should be firing different events. So if we refresh now, we should hopefully see 3 buttons, and they're going to raise the events, but not going to do anything. Oh, in fact, I've misnamed that, so that's mark as unread click. So see how that one's got different names. That's an error saying you've bound a handler called this, but there isn't one on the component, so you need to fix it. So we can just update that. So now we can go back to the main controller, and we'll find our messages toolbar, and we can hook up these events that we just raised to controller actions. So we have three different ones. So we have a delete, mark unread, and archive. I'll just paste these in for speed. So we've got three method names that we'll then create in the controller. So we'll go to the main controller base, and we will add these handlers. So we've got archive message first. I'll just paste this in and explain. So an archive the message, basically we want to take it out of the inbox. So we remove the label, we grab the selected message because we're on the details view. We remove the inbox label from it, and then we want to go back to the messages grid. So we just called the onBack to messages grid method, which will null the selected message, which will trigger the switch of the card menu, the card layout, sorry. So that's easy enough. The market is unread. All we need to do there is set the unread flag to true, and then we also return back to the messages grid. And then the delete is a little bit more involved, but not much for on delete. So we've got the method name there, on delete message. We grab the view model because we can access the view model that's tied to the main controller with the get view model method. And then we put it in VM for shorthand, didn't use it. So we can use the view model, we can use the get store to get the messages store. Then all we want to do is call the remove method by pass in the selected message that we've got stored, which is one that we're viewing. So we remove it there, and then we just head back to the messages grid. So if we refresh now, we should see this also be marked as unread. Oh, it's not working. Do I get the names right? Mark unread, delete. Oh, mark unread. Try again. Yeah, so now we've got, so this one goes bold because it's got the unread flag set. And equally, we could archive it. Did I get that one right? On archive message. So this isn't filtered, so it's just showing all of them. So the archive won't work at the moment, but we'll come to that when we get our folder set up. And delete. So that top one there, Lacey, has disappeared. So that's good. So we've got the delete working, we've got the mark unread working, and the archive we will see working hopefully once we get the folder structure set up. So that's what we're going to do now. Oh, and one last thing I think we missed is at the moment we have a messages count here. So I'll show you how we can do that. So this is another component we're going to add to the messages toolbar. So toolbars have a couple of special shorthand components you can use. So this is the one called, it's a spacer. So we can use the dash and an arrow, and that will create a component, basically create a component with a flex 1, which will stretch and push everything out after it to the right hand side of the screen. So that's how we get to get that component over there. And we're just going to create a basic component with X type component. And we're going to have a template, which is a sort of an X template string that's interpolated with the data that we pass it. So we're going to have a property called count, and we're going to show messages, and that's going to show the message count inside. And we're going to give it a default data of just empty, just so it has something to play with. And then we're going to create a bind config, which is going to set us how it's going to be shown. So we're going to show, we're going to set the hidden. We're going to do it the same as the other ones. So we don't want it shown. We want it shown on the list and not on the details view. So we're going to copy the hidden binding from the refresh button, which is going to say if there's a message present, then we hide it, and if there's not, then we show it. And then we can also create a bound data property. So this object here will get passed to this template when it gets reevaluated, and we want one property called count. And we're going to we want to access the count of the messages store basically. So we can do that by referencing the messages store's name, which is messages, and there's a shorthand to get the count of the store if we just do .count, and that will do effectively a get count method call on the messages store and give us the result and put it into that binding. So if we refresh this, there we go, so we've got 1,000 messages, and if we delete one, it will reevaluate that count because the messages store has changed. It's got one less item in it, and it reevaluates to 99. So that will always be kept up to date as the messages store changes, which is really good. And if we refresh, it will pull in the messages again and go back to 1,000. So that's a quick way to access some special properties of the stores that are in your view model. In this case, the messages store. So next, we're going to get the labels tree sorted. So we need to create a new component called, well, we're going to create a new namespace called labels, and we're going to create a new file called labelstree.js. And we created at the start, last week we created a, oh, we didn't, oh, we haven't, okay, we need to go do that. We've not got the messages, the labels store and things ready, so let's do that first. Sorry, I thought we did that last week. So we'll create a quick label model. This will give you show how easy it is to do. So we've got label.js. I'll just paste it in for speed and explain it. So we've got xmail is the root namespace. We're in the model sub namespace, and the class is called label. And we're going to extend the tree model, which is a special type of model. Basically, it sort of gives the model some extra properties that are needed to sort of maintain a tree structure. So things like the icon that shows the level it's at, that sort of thing, and any children it has. So all we have is name, and we're going to have this unread count, which is going to be used to show this little number beside each label. So that's what we've got there. We'll create a quick store as well called labels, and we can, I'll just paste this in and show you how it works. So we've got the store namespace, and it's called labels, and we extend the tree store, which is again a slightly different store type, which to support a tree structure. So it's got its children and that sort of thing. So we give an alias called labels. We attach our model that we just created to it, and we give we'll give it a better name. So we give it its root property, which is basically a tree has to have a single node at the root. So this is where we attach that. That's where we attach all the subsequently loaded data to. It all goes as a child of this root. So we've got just name it something, and we've set expand it to true, so it will feed through to the tree component. And we just use a simple proxy, Ajax proxy, hitting this data file, which is called labels, and all it's got is a structure, a tree structure with our labels. So if you look at the final, so we've got inbox, starred, sent, drafts, and then all mail, and then there's user labels, which has child items, home, with a few children, and they have leaf true set, and that shows that they are the last in the tree in that sort of branch. So that's what we're going to load in, and we're going to use that to show in our tree. So we'll make use of that store in our view model, because we want that to be created when we create the main model. So we require in that one, we should probably have a requires for messages too, so we'll add that there while we're here. And we, in the stores config, we just make a store called labels, and we remember we use an alias of labels when we created the store. That's this here. So that's the value that we use to create the label store. So now we have a label store in the view model ready for using. So we'll go back to our tree. So we're going to make the tree component that will consume that labels store. Now let's just bring it in. So here's the basic structure: x.define xmail view labels tree. We extend the tree panel this time, and we give it an alias, an x type of labels tree. And for this, we're going to extend an init component, which is a pattern to set up the config of the component just after it's sort of set itself up, so we can provide it with some configs to the class itself, and then have them apply to the component when it's rendered. So we've got x.apply this, and I'm sure this is familiar to you all. So it will apply this config object to the class instance itself. So a tree has a columns array. So it's basically a tree panel is basically it's kind of like a grid, but with nested structure. So we define columns for it, which shows you what values to show in the tree structure. So we're going to use a type called tree column, and we're going to have a header false because we don't want to show a title on it. If we had header true, then this text here would show. So we can just get rid of that. Don't need that. And data index is what value is going to show in this tree column. So it's essentially like a grid. So we choose name, and that will look for the name property on the model and show it in the tree. And we set flex 1 just so it stretches out to the full width. So that's all we need to get us going. In fact, we've got one more. So we're going to set the config root visible false. So remember that root property that we set here. If we set root visible true, that root node would be shown in the tree. Sometimes you might want that, but in this case, it's just it's just because we have to have a root. So we only have it there because we have to. So we just say root visible false, and that means it's hidden, and we get this structure instead of having another node at the top called root. So that's all we need there. So now we can go back to our main view, and we'll add it in. So first we need to requires it. So we'll xmail.view.labels.labels tree. And that means make sure the file gets loaded in when we start the component, and also when we build the final application, it makes sure it's got all the dependencies it needs. And then we're going to add this as we want it on the left. So we've got a border layout here, if you remember. So that means we can define east, west, north, south, and the center panel. So at the moment we've got a center which just fills the screen. So we're going to add a west region, sorry, not east, a west region. So we'll use the X type, labels-labels tree. We'll say the region is west, and we'll give it a width, just so it's always, so it's always shown. See what I used in the other. We said 300, just to make sure it's got enough space to show everything. And we're going to, at the moment, we've not set up a data source for this tree. So at the moment, it's just going to show an empty tree because it's got no data source. So we need to tell it what we want to use. And in this case, we want to use that labels store we created in the view model. So we use the bind config, we store, and we say labels in the curly bracket syntax. And now, if we refresh, we should see our tree. So you'll see in the bottom, we've got 2 AJAX calls now, or 3, that one's part of the framework setup. This is labels.json loading in this data here. And we can select these if you want, but they don't actually change anything here. So now we need to tie these 2 things together. So what we want to do is we want to, when the user clicks one of these labels, we want to refresh the messages grid with the messages that only fall into under that label. So we're going to do that with some filters. But first of all, we need to track what label has actually been clicked. So you can see one of them selected at all times. So we want to be able to have access to that so that we can apply the filters correctly. So we're going to use in the bind config, we're going to use the selection property, and that gives us access to the basically selected model within the tree. So we'll just stash it in a data property called selected label, and we'll go to our view model in our main model, and we'll add it here beside the selected message. We'll set it to null to start with. So now when we click a label, it will populate this property with the model instance. So that gets us part of the way there. So the next thing is to handle that selection change and do something with it. So just see. So first we're going to create a binding to the selected label property. So what we want to do in the constructor is we're going to use the this.bind method, and this will create basically we give it a property to watch, and if that property changes, then we run a function. It's just the same as the bind config in our components. If those properties change, then we run the component itself, takes the value and applies it somewhere in the components. In this case, we want to watch the selected label property. We just use the curly bracket syntax the same way as we do elsewhere, and we're going to give it a function name. So we're going to give it onSelected label change, and we're going to pass in this. So the scope is the view model itself. So when the selected label changes, what we want to do is we want to filter the messages store and say, right, get rid of everything that doesn't have this label as part of its labels array. So here's this function that we're going to do. So this is the name that relates to that, and we have this label record is the value that this selected label property now has after this bind is triggered. So sometimes it could be null if it's set to null, and if it's been clicked and there's one selected, then it will have a value. So first of all, we use the clear filter method and say get rid of all the filters we've already got because we're changing the filter. And then we use let me widen this a bit so you can see all. So then we use the filter by method, which takes a function and lets us, it will be run on each record in the store, and if the function returns a true, then we keep the record. If it's false, then we put it to one side and we don't show it in the collection. And it's important to know this doesn't actually get rid of any of the models in the store. It just splits them into filtered and unfiltered, and anything that's bound to the store will only show the filtered ones. So in this filter by function, we get a message record as the one argument. And if the label record is null, then we just want to return false and exclude everything. But if it's not, then we use the hasLabel function that we used in we created in the message model, and we pass in the label ID. So if this message record has the label ID that we've selected, then we keep that message. Otherwise, we throw it away. So I think if we refresh this now, if we click inbox, then we get a subset now. We've only got 15 messages. Starred, there's none. Sent, there's none. Drafts, there's none. All mail is everything because they've all got the all mail label attached. So that gets us pretty close. But if you noticed that when we first refresh the page, there's no messages because nothing's selected here. So that selected label property is still null. So when we first load the store, the label store, we want to select the first one. In this case, we want to select an inbox. So what we'll do to do that is we'll use another bind. So in this time, we basically want to know if the first record in the labels store changes, then we want to trigger something and make that first record the selected label. So we can do that with a special hook to this label store. So we pick up the label store by name there, and then we can do dot first. And this is one of the other shortcuts. We used the dot count property earlier for the messages count, and this is dot first, means it relates to the first record in the store, and if that changes, then we want to run this function. So we'll call a function called onFirstLabelRecord change, and pass in this to get the scope. And we'll just create that there in a comma. So onFirstLabelRecord change, that's auto-completed function, and that will give us a label record. And we want to push that label record into the selected label property so that it will trigger all the subsequent changes. So when that selected label record changes, this function will run and it will filter the store. So now when we refresh, the inbox label gets selected first, and this gets pre-filtered so that our first look at the app shows the inbox selected and the message list filtered. So now we're looking pretty good. So the next thing we want to do is, in our further on example, we can see that we've got a number beside each folder which relates to the unread count. So we need to calculate that on the client side because that's not part of the data. So when we're going to use a hook to the messages store, we're going to use the data changed event. So we're just going to, in the constructor, we're going to do this.get store messages. We want to, anytime the message store changes, we want to recalculate how many unreads are in each folder. So to do that, we need to wait for a data change event, and then when that triggers, we want to recalculate everything. So we're going to use the on method, which will say anytime this event name happens, run this function. So we're going to call this.calculate unread counts. And we're going to pass in this as the scope so that we keep reference to the view model. So I'm going to paste this in. This is kind of a complicated function we'll talk through quickly. So we're going to get the label store. We basically want to take each label and we're going to find how many messages have the unread flag on them, and then we're going to get all those and count them, and then apply that count to the label record itself in the unread count field that we have in it. So we're going to loop through each label in turn and count them. So I'll take the first label, and then we're going to get the store, the messages store, and we're going to use this query by function, which is kind of like a filter, but instead of actually filtering the store, it just gives us a collection of an array of, well, it's not an array actually, it's a mixed collection of records that match that filter effectively. So in the previous one, we used the filter by, which actually filtered the store and will affect all the components that are bound to it. In this case, the query by will just say, collect the records together and give you a collection of them, and you can do with it as you wish. In this case, we just want to count them, but in other cases, you might want to push them into another store, or you might want to, send them up to the server, or just get the IDs or anything like that. So it's kind of like a little kind of SQL query type thing. So we use query by, and it just takes a function and gives us a message record, and we can return true or false based on the function's result. So I'm going to simplify it down a little bit. Let me just take this bit off because that's I think for next week. So we check that the message record has the label that we're currently dealing with. So that's simple enough. We just pass in the ID to the has label. If that's true, then this message is part of this label. So we want to include it in the count, and we need to check whether it has an unread flag set to true. I'll just use that as a hand. So that will say, will give us a list of all the messages that are part of the label and are unread. And then, as I said, that returns us a mixed collection, which we can use a get count function call on, and that will give us the count. And then we can apply that to the unread count field of the label. So now, well, that's not going to change anything because it's going to do the counts thing in the background, but we're not showing it anywhere. So in our final example, we show it in a little bracket. So to do that, we need to go back to the labels tree, and we need to tell in here. So at the moment, just showing the name because the data index is there. But just like a grid, we can pass in a renderer to this, which we can use to control how the output is formatted, or how we can change it based on various properties that we can check. So in our case, we want to show the unread count after the value. So we're going to use the property on renderer that gives the value, which will just be the name in this case, raw. And then there's the meta property, which lets us modify bits and pieces about the row, and then the record, which is the label record that we're actually dealing with in this thing. So we'll create a variable called hasUnread, and we'll check whether the unread count is greater than 0. And that'll give us a Boolean flag. So we can use this meta property to access the style property of the TD. So basically the table cell. And this is a bit, maybe not the nicest way to do it. We maybe want to move this into CSS style classes rather than inline style strings, but that's what we're just going to do now for quickness. So we set the TD style at the font weight. If we have unread, then we want it to be bold. If we don't, then we want it to be normal. So that'll give us the bold style. So if we just return value now, we should see that the inbox becomes bold and all mail becomes bold because the unread count is greater than 0. So that gets us halfway there. And next we want to add we want to create a string which has the unread count in it if we have it. So we're going to create a quick wee string template. So we're going to basically want to create a span with a brackets, a wee space with the unread count. But we only want to use this if the unread count is actually greater than 0. So if the has unread is, oops, sorry. So we then create another span to wrap the value in the name, and then we're going to tack on this on the end. So we've passed the value into this string.format, so let's just replace placeholder. So the value, that'll be the name, will go into 0, and if has unread is true, then we pass in this template that we've built and put it into the place of 1, and if it doesn't, then we just create an empty string and it'll just put nothing on the end. So there's, there'll be 100 ways to do this. That's just one way that you can do it. And now we see that we've got a 9, which is the number of unreads in the inbox, and the number of unreads in the all mail. So if we do a star, then the message grid, the message store will be updated with that star, and that will trigger off this unread counts function to reevaluate, and that will then put a 1 in the starred filter, label filter, and that will get us this. So now we can see 1, and if we click it to read it, then it should change. Oh, it's not changing at the moment. We'll come back to that. So now we've got the label tree all set up and all linked together so that we filter the message store when we select different labels, and we can add stars, and we can do other actions in the grid when we select a message. So that's 5 minutes to go to the top of the hour. That's us got through everything that we wanted to get through, so hopefully that's all been quite clear. I'd love to hear any questions that you might have or any comments about how you might do things differently, how, why I did something a certain way. I'd love to hear some feedback. So if there's any questions, stick them in the questions panel and we can get them. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and yeah, check out the repo, have a play around with it, and hopefully we'll see you back next week to see the final part where we get the compose email features working and tie it all together. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Stuart. It's pretty cool. A lot of stuff crammed in there very quickly. So yeah, just as always, we will be getting the replays up and available to everybody, and make sure that we get that shared through. So there's been a slight delay in getting the blog post up and moving through this week, but we will have that up soon. Quick question here, in terms of the events that you've been setting up and the parameters that are used, where do you find out what parameters and what order of parameters there are to kind of put into some of those events?
Yeah, so the docs have all these listed. So if you grab the docs, if I find the right thing, each component, if you go to the API block, and let me find a good one. Oh, tab panel, as good as any. So if you click through the component you've got, and tick inherited, so you'll see the little lightning bolt has all the events that component raises, and then if you go through to the details, you'll see all the parameters that it has, generally, if you want to be quick, generally all the events, sorry, pass in the component that raised it as its first parameter. So you've always got access to that, generally speaking. And then the last one is usually the event object itself, and then in between it will have all the relevant ones for that event. You know, for this case, if you added an item, it's got the item that you added and the index it was added at. So yeah, head to the docs, into the event section, and it has all of them listed there.
Great. Yeah, one of the elements you showed earlier was the special character with the dash and the right arrow to be able to push the bits to the right-hand side in the toolbar. Is there an equivalent for pushing bits to the left?
Well, because it all runs left to right in the left to right setup, things will be pushed to the left by default. So you don't really push things to the left, you push everything else to the right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just apply it after the one that you want on the left.
So yes, it's always after the one you want to the left, and you can then you can do it if you don't want to use a special syntax. You can, where did I do it? Was it in the toolbar? So that's the equivalent of this, effectively a flex one component. In fact, it's actually the equivalent of a TB spacer. So it's really, that's a shorthand for that, which is a shorthand for that, effectively. So you get wee bits and pieces extra, but that's what it's effectively doing, is just creating a flex component that will push everything to one side.
Yeah, and Andrew's just asking again about the recording. So we'll get the recordings posted up. In the meantime, it normally takes about an hour after the webinar's run, but if you re-register for today's webinar, it will take you straight back in to watch the replay anyway, so you can watch it back on demand pretty quickly. We are working at getting these up into BrightTalk and also onto YouTube as well. We're looking to try and get these onto both platforms. And just a couple of changes in processes internally here, which has just caused a slight delay getting last week's up on, but we will have those up very shortly. Excellent. I think from having a look at the other questions in here, you've answered them as you've been going through anyway, so that's all good. If anybody's got any question that they want to ask, then obviously please just put a quick flag in. We can always unmute you if you want to ask it audibly instead. In fact, let's just, I'm going to unmute everybody anyway. So if you've got a question, please feel free just to unmute and ask it straight away. Okay, doesn't look like there's any additional questions then for this week, Stuart. Thank you very much. Next week, we've obviously got the final part of this this build session going through. Looking forward to seeing kind of the final parts come in. It's looking pretty cool. So if you have any questions or comments, then please feel free just to email me back from the automated messages that come out about the webinar, or just drop Stuart a message over. Obviously, we're here to try and do fun things that are of great value to you guys. So please let us know if there's any specific areas you'd like covered in the future. But if nothing else, then thank you very much for attending. Happy coding, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Great, thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks,
See you
Stuart.
next week.